Good morning, everyone. Welcome to this, the second of our EATiP On the Horizon EU Framework Programme Aquaculture Project dissemination events. My name is David Bassett, and I am the General Secretary of EATiP, the European Aquaculture Technology and Innovation Platform. And I'm joined in the administration of today's event by my colleagues from EATiP, Alexandra and Catherine, and from Erin Innovation, Marika and Matteo and Katie, who've been working hard to put this session together. These online sessions, along with the EATiP online thematic forum events that we run, were born out of lockdown and the necessity to keep dissemination and communication channels open from our platform. But they were also born out of an increasing desire on the part of EATiP to be proactively engaging in the dissemination and communication of project outputs in the spirit of knowledge transfer, of application to industry of research and development outputs, and to support the principles of the Horizon framework programs of dissemination and communication being one of the key objectives of projects. And furthermore, in a spirit of working towards supporting the EU strategic guidelines for a sustainable European aquaculture that were launched last year. As you'll be aware, having registered for the event today, these events are free to attend, and we hope to grow the profile of the events over future months. So in this regard, and before we even begin this session, already, I'd like to invite you to think of EU-funded aquaculture projects you're engaged in, specifically those that have meaningful outputs and results which you wish to share with end users, and to consider if this forum might be a suitable event for you to use in the future. And if this is the case, then please think to contact the EATiP Secretariat, and we'd be delighted to discuss that with you. So returning to today's session, we're going to consider 5 projects in relation to aquaculture and associated environmental impact. My colleague Alexandra is going to introduce those speakers in due course, but we'll be considering product environmental footprint, computer modeling, waste and nutrient remineralization, low trophic aquaculture, and sustainability assessments. After the event, a recording of the presentations and the presentations themselves will be made available to registered participants. They'll be hosted online and you'll be sent a link advising when that happens. In addition to the project talks, I'm delighted to be welcoming Laurent Markovitch from the European Commission DG Environment, who will provide us with a general introduction to the EU environmental rules applying to aquaculture and the policy context behind those rules. Indeed, in a way that's underpinning why it is that we need to address the issues of aquaculture and environmental interaction. Generally speaking, at EATiP, we've liaised most with DG Mare and DG RTD. So we're delighted to be crossing silos today to DG Environment, and we welcome Laurent to this forum. Unfortunately, because of other diary commitments, he won't be able to stay for the whole event, so there won't be an opportunity to ask questions immediately after his talk. But if you do have any questions, please either email them to us or put them in the Q&A section of the Zoom framework. So having mentioned the Q&A section, I'll just quickly go through some housekeeping rules which did appear on screen, and I can reassure you will shortly reappear, I'm sure. But basically, for the purposes of this event, if you could use the Q&A function to enter your questions. If you have a specific comment for somebody within the event, please use the @ symbol and then their name. If you would like if you have a more complex, detailed question, please provide your email address in the Q&A facility and we'll be able to respond afterwards. And if you see a question that somebody else has entered and you think it's particularly pertinent and relevant, then please use the thumbs up symbol, which flags the question, and we'll prioritize those. Just before we start the presentations, we're going to run a quick introductory poll just to gather some information on who is attending this morning and what your previous engagements with other EU projects are. And Katie across at Erin is going to push the buttons. So the first poll, if you would be so kind just to tell us if you're representing research, academia, industry, or a commercial company, not profit organization, or you're representing another section. And just to remind those of us who are panelists, we're not able to vote in this one, but if the registered participants could quickly answer that question, as it's very interesting for us to see the proportionate breakdown of who is attending from where. And I think you should have all had time to have managed to click one of those options by now. So we'll just ask a second quick question, which is just to verify, are you involved in an EU-funded project with relevance to aquaculture? And again, it's just to help us gauge from the audience whether you're actively participating in the research frameworks, or if you're attending more in the capacity as an observer or as somebody keen to learn more about project outputs. So yes, if you're currently engaged, there's an option if you've been involved in past projects, and obviously no means no. So I'll give you a couple more seconds to select the option that applies to you. Thank you, Katie, for putting up those two questions. And as part of the summing up at the end, we'll be able to see who there is. So thank you for taking part. We wish you an interesting and hopefully an informative session this morning. I will speak to you again at the end. My colleagues will be presenting the speakers throughout, and we begin in earnest. So thank you very much for your attention to our first speaker, who I remind you is Laurent Markovitch of the European Commission, DG Environment. Laurent, thank you very much for joining us this morning.
Good morning, everybody. Can you see me and hear me well?
No. I can see you and I can hear you.
Very good.
Yeah, me too.
And your presentation should be getting brought up shortly.
Yes, thank you very much. Thank you, David and Catherine, for inviting me to this session. I will give you a brief.
Hello? Okay.
Overview. I think I lost the line at some point. Yeah, okay, I'm back.
Yes, but we hear you again now, so
you hear me well?
Yep, we hear you now. We lost you for a moment.
Yeah, I hope it doesn't happen again. Please bear with me if my introduction is not really complete or comprehensive, because I don't work much with aquaculture, but I try to gather information from my colleagues and put it together. Of course, the presentation will be available to the participants, so I think Catherine or David will take care of that. So I work in the unit dealing with marine environment and clean water services. So part of it is freshwater and more urban wastewater, and the other one is the marine environment. And mostly we implement the Marine Strategy Framework Directive, which is relevant in some part to the aquaculture activities in the marine environment. So we'll see that at the end of the presentation. You could move to the next slide, please. Okay, so what's the international context? And this is my point of view, and it might be incomplete, especially this one slide. So as far as I can see, I mean, as regards the international context, we have the UN Sustainable Development Goals, which are relevant to aquaculture, zero hunger, so that's SDG 2, I think. Responsible consumption and production might be SDG 8, climate action, and life below water, which is SDG 12, if I'm not mistaken. You also have the FAO's Code of Conduct for Responsible Fisheries, and there might be further work on directly towards aquaculture, but I must confess I'm not fully aware of that. You can move to the next slide. So now the EU context, and for that one I'm a bit more aware. Obviously, the Green Deal is the big flagship initiative of the Commission for this mandate. So among other things, you have the biodiversity strategy for 2030, the Farm to Fork initiative, the nature restoration law, which will be adopted hopefully by summer in June actually, and the strategic guidelines for aquaculture. From my perspective, they're all relevant to aquaculture, especially in the marine environment. You also have fisheries, because the common fisheries policy does cover aquaculture, sustainable aquaculture. And as far as environment is concerned, you have a number of directives and regulations and initiatives. So I'll list them. The Strategic Environment Assessment Directive, the Environmental Impact Assessment Directive, the Birds and Habitats Directive, because as far as I understand, you may have aquaculture activities inside Natura 2000 sites. There's no mismatch between these two. Also, regulations on alien species, because obviously aquaculture might, in the process of importing new species into EU waters, you might also import alien species. The Water Framework Directive, which is mostly relevant for freshwater, and the Marine Strategy Framework Directive. So at the end of the presentation, I will touch upon most of those regulations and directives. And as far as research is concerned, and on that one, I'm really not an expert. You have Horizon Europe, of course, which includes the Mission Ocean, and the MFAF, which is the European Maritime Fisheries and Aquaculture Fund. So this is managed by DG Mare, and I'm pretty sure you're working with them on a daily basis. So my conclusion, and since you're focusing on research, my conclusion is that green, so DG Environment, let's say, blue, DG Mare, and all human activities at sea must go hand in hand, and we need more research and more knowledge to bridge the gaps, especially as far as we want to deliver the objectives under the Green Deal. You can move to the next one. So challenges in brief, that's obvious things, but sometimes it's useful to state the obvious. So you have crisis ongoing or past ones, Brexit, COVID, the war in Ukraine. There seems to be an international move to retreat a bit back from the globalization back to closer to home. So blocks, whether it be the EU, China, or other blocks. Of course, the biodiversity and climate crisis are very much high on the public agenda and on the political agenda. For marine aquaculture, you obviously need protein. A lot of them is derived from fish stocks in the wild, and which is used for feed. So if you want, sorry, if aquaculture is further set to increase, you need to find probably alternative sources of proteins and feed. We have food security issues. At EU level, we still import 2/3 of our seafood. Some of it is partially probably unregulated or badly regulated. Some of it is not sustainable. We have the invasive alien species issues and the pollution, and that's very varied, and probably other challenges which I did not mention. Might move to the next slide. So whenever you have challenges, obviously you need to be able to get a hold of opportunities. So opportunities, one of them would be more research and knowledge, which we need to help deliver the Green Deal objectives. Aquaculture is also a source of nature-based solution. For instance, oyster aquaculture can capture CO2, or other, let's say, mariculture, aquaculture for algae and others. And they also can deliver environmental services that can help address the planetary crisis, so biodiversity crisis, the climate crisis, and so on. And all in all, the aquaculture must be included in a fully integrated food system approach, so to help bridge all the gaps we have. So the objective under the DG Mare guidelines for sustainable aquaculture, of course, is to scale up the EU aquaculture, but we also need to implement the Green Deal, and that's the objective. And we need to keep our high environmental standards. So challenge, but also opportunities. You may move to the next slide. So briefly, I'm not going to read that, but I'm just quoting a couple of articles and paragraphs in the Common Fisheries Policy, and that's from Article 2 of the CFP, just to show that it does cover fishing, obviously, but also aquaculture, and it aims at ensuring that those two are environmentally sustainable in the long term, implementing an ecosystem-based approach, and it also endeavor to ensure that aquaculture avoids the degradation of the marine environment. And obviously, this is the basis for the development of the guidelines for sustainable aquaculture. Next slide, please. So still on the CFP, again, sustainable aquaculture in the EU, and a very good part which we like, which is Article 25J. The CFP shall be coherent with the Union environmental legislation. In particular, the objective of achieving good environmental status. This directive is the MSFD. I will touch upon that later. And so in sum, the CFP covers sustainable aquaculture, the ecosystem approach to management, and contributes to delivering the objectives under the EU's environmental legislation. Next slide, please. So now, what do we do in DG Environment in relation to aquaculture? So the two first ones, I must say, I looked up on our web pages because I'm not really acquainted with those two directives, but the SEA and EIA do apply to a wide range of public and/or private projects, and the last one in particular includes aquaculture. So as far as I understand, those apply when there is a new project for an aquaculture plant or similar activities. You also have two regulations concerning invasive alien species. So the first one is really specific to the use of alien and locally absent species in aquaculture, and it sets rules for the authorization of use of non-EU species, let's say, and make sure as far as possible they don't become invasive if they escape from the aquaculture facilities. And the second one is more general, and it does not apply to species listed in Annex 4 to the regulation above, but there might be other species which are not listed in Annex 4 and might be interesting for aquaculture. This I'm not certain, to be honest. Next slide. Now, the Water Framework Directive is a bit more relevant for freshwater aquaculture. It does, however, cover all the impacts on water, and so it includes transitional water up to 1 nautical miles at sea. And the main objective is to achieve good ecological status of the water bodies. So it has various tools which are used to deliver those means and objectives. And there's a specific guideline on the application of the Water Framework Directive to aquaculture activities. So if you're interested or not aware, you may want to have a look at that one, and that's why I provide the link. And next slide, please. So now this the MSFD, the Marine Strategy Framework Directive, is the directive which my unit takes care of. And similar to the Water Framework Directive, here the objective is to achieve a good environmental status of the EU marine waters, and there's a list of 11 descriptors for each of which you need to reach GS. And basically the objective of this directive is to reconcile the environmental protection and the sustainable use of marine waters by human activities. So it is a framework directive, which means it touches upon plastic pollution, fisheries, noise in water, contaminants, and so on and so forth, but it does not regulate those activities directly, because you have sectoral regulations in directive regulating the sectoral sectors themselves. For instance, fisheries is covered by the common fisheries policy, but the MSFD does set objectives and threshold values that need to be reached to make sure that the human activities use the marine environment in a sustainable way, so that in sum the impact on the marine environment of human activities is below a threshold, or below a ceiling, let's say, that is acceptable and does not impair the ecosystem, the marine ecosystem. Next slide. So there is a list of 11 descriptors, and I think I tried to select those which I think are most relevant for aquaculture. But if you look up the MSFD, you will see the full list. So in my view, those 4 or 5 are most relevant to aquaculture, insofar that aquaculture may have impact on those indicators. So non-indigenous species, which is similar to invasive species. Element of the food webs occur at natural abundance levels and diversity, and the long-term abundance of the species in the ecosystem is not impaired. So that might have to do with possible escapes from aquaculture facilities. Eutrophication is minimized and does not give rise to adverse effects on the water. Same thing. Pollution from aquaculture facilities. The concentration of contaminants does not give rise to pollution effects. And the last one, marine litter does not cause harm to coastal and marine environment. So in my view, all of those may or might be relevant for aquaculture activities. Next slide. And in the MSFD, you have a couple of annexes that lists the human activities that are potentially affecting the marine environment. So as you can see, aquaculture is mentioned both for marine waters and also freshwater. But these are not the only ones, because there is a list of about 30 activities impacting or potentially impacting the marine environment. Next slide, please. And in Annex 2A of the MSFD again, you have a list of pressures that are relevant to the marine environment in relation to human activities. And I selected the ones I thought were most relevant for aquaculture. So you have a list of biological pressures, input of non-indigenous species, potential impact of microbial pathogens, GMOs, translocation of native species, and so on and so forth, and the input of substances like organic matter, so the input of synthetic substances, so it could be pharmaceuticals and other things like this, and litter, solid waste and micro litter as well, potentially. Next slide. Okay, here you have the list of the 11 descriptors and the level to which the member states, so all the coastal, the 23 or 22 member states as a whole, could conclude on the status of their marine waters in relation to good environmental status. So as you can see, we have a mixed picture. For some of the descriptors, for instance, D5 eutrophication It's been a long-studied subject, of course, and you have also variations across the marine water. So, for instance, obviously in the Baltic, eutrophication is a very big issue. It's a bit less so in other EU waters, but as you can see, 90% of the member states could conclude on where they stand relative to good environmental status for eutrophication. And it's because there's a long history of studying this subject behind this eutrophication issue. If you go to D11 and energy, and especially underwater noise, it's not that the problem is new, but it's that it's been studied for not such a long time, and therefore the level of knowledge is still developing, and that's why you have only 12% of the member states being able to conclude on this subject. And for the rest of the descriptors, you have a varied picture as well. So ranging basically between 12% to 90%. And I believe this is the last slide. Or close.
Yes.
Yes, that's the last slide. So thank you for your attention. I hope I was not too long in my presentation. As I said in the beginning, I'm really not a specialist of aquaculture, but I try to do my best to prepare something meaningful and useful. If you have any questions, please send them to the EATiP colleagues, and they will send them back to me, and I will make my best to find an answer for you, or contact the colleagues who have the knowledge and share it with you. Thank you very much for your attention.
And Laurent, thank you very much. For having said you're not an expert in the area, you've given us a very comprehensive introduction and much food for thought. With your permission, I won't attribute it to you, but I'm going to use your quote, "Green and blue must go hand in hand with research as a bridge." I like that very much. And I will use that in future presentations. It's interesting. I'll just say one word now, because obviously you can't join us for the whole morning. So thank you very much. It's interesting how the framework projects evolve into regulation. Just one thing you were mentioning that springs to mind. I was involved in the 7th framework program on the Impasse project, looking at alien species and regulation. And now we find over a decade later how, in fact, outputs from the research comes into regulation. So I think, again, that's something to help contextualize us this morning, that the projects we're going to hear from and projects we're currently engaging in at the moment will in time inform policy and regulation, is why we're all here. So again, thank you. It helps bring together the purpose of what we're doing and some of the applications for research, not just for industry, but also from the regulatory and commission perspective as well.
If I may, David, I fully agree with you. That's really a clear pattern we see everywhere. First, you need data, and for data, you need research. And from there, you build policies, you need information. I mean, the EU treaties are based on science-based and science-informed decision-making. So we need information, knowledge, and research to build our policies. And of course, you have a delay, which is sometimes unwelcome, and it makes people a bit unpleased, but that's the way it goes. And you need time to build a policy. It's not when you have a research output or the result of one or a couple of projects that you can build a solid policy. You need to involve stakeholders. So it means the research community, but also the industry, the civil society or NGOs. It all takes time, but then it's also a way to make sure we have sort of a consensus, because in the end, if you address the industry, whatever industry, whether it be fishing industry or aquaculture industry or any other industry using marine waters or fresh waters, if they're not on board at a reasonable level, you cannot expect to deliver policies. So and to deliver objectives, because in the end, what you hear in the news, some must say Brussels decided, Brussels said, we must do that because Brussels said, but in the end, it's only very, very partially true, and especially as far as the Commission goes, because yes, the Commission is not elected, it's true, but in the end, the final decision makers are the Council, so that means the member states and the Parliament, and those are elected. So, and they also make sure that the opinion of the civil society and the stakeholders and the industry are taken into account. So it's a complex machine, but we're making progress. It's a bit slow, and people are easily disappointed, I understand, but we deliver things.
But a multi-stakeholder approach that a multi-stakeholder platform like EATiP fully embraces and encourages, and reflection and taking time to make the correct decisions is important. So thank you again. Let's now hear from some of the projects. So I will pass over to Alexandra to introduce the first of our project output speakers today. Over to you, Alexandra, and thank you again, Laurent.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much for this interesting talk on the policy. And as David said, we are going now a little bit more on some concrete examples of the outputs that have been generated by EU-funded projects. And this is presented here today at the webinar, but we will also make them available, as David said earlier on, so that we will have a true dissemination of the outputs for the stakeholders beyond those that are maybe here today and that would also have an interest in it. So we're very happy to welcome as the first speaker to this On the Horizon forum, Soya Ramos from ASTI. She's a senior researcher at the Efficient and Sustainable Food Chain Department of ASTI, which is a scientific and technology center in Spain. It's also an EATiP member. And Soya herself, she has a long experience in applying environmental footprint of food products and diets. And her work is focused specifically on developing software tools related to the calculation of these environmental footprints of food products, and here also on aquaculture products. So we are looking forward to hear what the outcomes of the AquaPEF project have resulted in. So Soya, if you can share your screen, and then we're ready for your presentation.
Okay, thank you. I want to first thank you, EATiP, for giving me this opportunity to present main outcomes of the Life AquaPEF project, and also thank you to the all attendants for being here. I think it will be interesting for all of us to hear about these framework policies, to hear about different results on the European projects that sometimes remains that at the end of the project there is no more, and I think that these kind of events give us the opportunity to extend the impact of the project. So I think that you can see my screen. No? Yes, no? So I'm going to present today the main results from the Life AquaPEF project. This project, the goal is the implementation of an effective product environmental footprint in the Mediterranean aquaculture. So what is the needs of the industry? As we all know, so the aquaculture sector is growing exponentially due to the increasing demand on fish protein. We know that wild fish stocks are almost overexploited, most of them, and now aquaculture appears as a suitable sector for dealing with this protein demand, fish protein demand. However, we know that aquaculture could have some environmental impact, and indeed it has, as all the human activities. It's not especially high, it's not especially low environmental impact, but there are some environmental impact that should be reduced as much as possible. Within this framework, the European Commission also launched the Product Environmental Footprint Methodology in 2013. Not 13, no, it was later, sorry. But there has been this Single Market for Green Products initiative with the European Commission, and now they are in the transition stage for bringing to the market this methodology. Product environmental footprint is based on the LCA methodology. This methodology accounts for different kinds of environmental impacts, like carbon footprint, water footprint, eutrophication, human toxicity, ecotoxicity. So different environmental impacts that are accumulated during the whole production chain of a given product. In this case, for example, sea bass or bream on the Mediterranean aquaculture production, we should account for the environmental impact linked from the, for example, feed production, how this species feed is produced, which kind of ingredients, the origin of these ingredients, etc., how the hatchery is managed, how the growing farms are managed, how much feed, the EFCR, the nutrient leaching to the environment, everything. Then the preparation in the different industries and final transportation. So this methodology, the product environmental footprint that will be on the market by 2023 or 2025, I think with this COVID situation, everything has delayed by 2 years. I think it will be 2025. It's a kind of complicated to measure by the industry because you have to take into account a lot of things, a lot of inputs and outputs to the system and different environmental impacts that are not very common for the final user. So with we say, okay, so there should be something to adapt to facilitate the implementation of this methodology in the industry. So this is how the Life AquaPEF was born. It is funded by the LIFE program from the DG ENVI. It started in 2018 and 2022, this is the final year of the project. We expect to finalize in December this year. What we have developed is a system or a tool, I don't know what you want to call it, a web tool to easily calculate the environmental footprint in marine open net farms of sea bass and bream production. This is a very easy to use tool and it calculates this environmental footprint according to the category rules established by the European Commission. So it's not as other kind of tools that you can calculate the carbon footprint in a way and then your competitor is calculating in another way, so it's not comparable and it gets to confusion to the consumer. The European Commission established category rules for marine fish environmental footprint, and we have developed this tool according to these category rules. The tool allows to benchmark your product, to compare between products, and to identify main causes and origin of the environmental impact. This is how it looks like. Basically, it's an online calculator. The user, this one, the first part of the tool is to develop the value chain because this is specifically environmental footprint is calculated for a given product. So if you are producing like whole sea bass and bream, whatever, you have to calculate for that specific product. No, it's not, each company should calculate their own environmental footprint. So each company should develop the value chain. It's very easy. It's an online calculator, a web tool. You don't have to install anything on the computer. It's everything on the net. To create the value chain, the most important part is to collect the inventory data required for the environmental footprint assessment. This is really the key of the tool where people or users has to introduce their input and output of the system. For example, the feed producer should include all the ingredients or the transportation, the energy requirements or water or wastewater, while the growing aquaculture company should include how much feed they include, how much juveniles, how much diesel, for example, for the vessel, etc. Once they have introduced all the inventory data, they could extract their results. Those could be, not in the moment, those could be certified, not now, because the whole regulation is still not there, but in the future it could be certified, and they allow the identification of the causes and origin of the environmental impact. Then the user will be able, for example, to create different scenarios. What happens if I change this feed? What happens if I use less diesel, but I increase the electricity? Things like that. It will be, the tool allows the comparison between these scenarios. It also will allow to compare against averages in Europe, for example, which is the average environmental impact of bass and bream, which is mine environmental impact. So then comparison, I'm above or below this average environmental impact. And this also allows for sustainability communication strategies to implement this kind of strategies. So if I am below the average environmental impact, so maybe I could communicate something. The end users of this tool could be different. The idea is to be used by the sea bass and bream aquaculture companies in the Mediterranean area. Currently, I think that there are like 600 companies that could be benefits of using this tool. We thought that big companies with specific sustainability department could use the tool on their own, because they already have some knowledge on this methodology. However, we have realized that SMEs or small companies, that they don't have a specific sustainability department, maybe they need the assistance of a consultancy in order to interpret the results, to introduce the numbers correctly, etc. Associations could benefit also of using this tool. They could offer this to their members or create common strategies for their members. And for sure, administration, as European Commission or national administration, could also benefit in order to establish future interventions for the sectors. If they tell to the user to calculate their environmental footprint, then they could have the overall image of the sector in their country, and then to establish an action plan and strategies just to reduce the environmental impact really where there is. This is how the tool offers the final impact. They could here for the 16 environmental impact categories that I have mentioned before. So it's not just climate change. We know that there are other kind of environmental impact, as Lorenzo already told us. There is the eutrophication, there is human toxicity, and resource depletion, water use. And depending on the impact, the origin of the impact could be different. So we really will be able to focus our efforts really on what we want to improve. The current status of the tool, as I said, this is the last year of the project. We are now in the TRL 7. We are validating with companies outside the project. We have already tested the tool with 4 companies, very big companies of the Mediterranean sea bass and bream production in Spain and Greece. We are now closing also some replication activities in Cyprus, maybe Italy, also trying to cover different parts of the European bass and bream production. And with this, with the feedback from the companies, we will be able to be ready to go to the market at the end of 2022. The main idea for the commercialization of this tool is to transfer this to a third company. As Alexandra already says, ASTI is a technology center. Our main aim is to research and to transfer to the industry. So we have the full package ready to go for going to the market. So okay, who want to commercialize this, who want to really bring this tool to the market and make this useful for, not useful it is, but make this accessible for the companies and for the associations and for the administrations. So thank you all for your attention. I don't know if you are interested for sure in testing the tool or yes, giving me any feedback about the tool, so please contact me.
Thank you very much, Sayaya. I think we are running a little bit late in time, so
Sorry.
That's okay. It was very interesting and very good to see that you are really close to having the product that is ready to be really used by end users. So I think we do have some questions for you, but I think we will leave it to the end, to the panel discussion then, because I would now like to give the words to Marieke for introducing the Aqua Excel speakers for the next, and then we will come back to you, Sayaya, for some discussion. So Marieke, I give the floor to you, and then you can introduce the next speaker.
Thank you, Alexandra. Yeah, I will be introducing the next two speakers, which have been working on the Aqua Excel project. So our first speaker will be Professor Taro Chen. He's from the University of Surrey in the UK. He trained as a process control engineer and is an expert in process modeling and optimization with particular applications to agricultural, biochemical, and pharmaceutical processes. His research has received funding from lots of different sources, such as the UK Research Council's EU Horizon programs and also industry. And that it also includes a BBSRC grant in using models and data analytics for optimizing the productivity of aquaculture, and also a new 4 million grants in which he will lead the model-based optimization of biomass production under controlled environments. He currently leads a group of 3 postdoctoral and 8 PhD researchers and has published over 100 peer-reviewed journal publications. So today he is going to present the outcomes of his Aqua Excel TNA project. It's called Adventure, which is about computer modeling to assist aquaculture production. So Tao, the floor is yours. Please go ahead and share your slides.
Thanks very much for the very kind introduction. So I'm trying to share my screen. I hope that's all right. Everyone is able to see it?
Yeah.
Okay,
perfect.
Great. Yeah, well, again, as Marita, you have introduced, I'm Taro Chen, and I work in the chemical engineering department. You may wonder, what is chemical engineering to do with aquaculture, to do with fish farming? But actually, from our perspective, we kind of view aquaculture as a general biomedical process, biochemical process, if you like. So essentially, you are trying to grow biomass in response to the various environmental parameters, and you are trying to find the way to optimize those environmental parameters. So this is where we are coming from. And particularly, my expertise is in computer modeling to assist the production monitoring, prediction, and optimization. And that is going to be the topic that I will talk about today. I have to declare that a lot of this work that I'm going to talk about has been funded by Aqua Excel, but in the same time, because of the COVID restrictions, our original plan to conduct experiments with our collaborator in this project in Hellenic Center for Marine Research in Greece was not able to go ahead, and therefore some of those contents are coming from the BBSRC project mentioned by Marita, where we try to apply modeling and the digital technologies to assist aquaculture production. So I'm going to go ahead and starting from the so-called knowledge need. I guess over the years we've seen a sort of a trend where I wouldn't say we move from open pond to research rating aquaculture systems, but actually we've seen a lot of increase of application of moving from an open fish farming processes into a more controlled environment. And because we operate in more and more in a controlled environment, we're able to implement a lot of modern digitalization and automation technologies. And therefore that will allow us to relieve a lot of labor-intensive activities. So our argument is the infrastructure is already there. Infrastructure is being modernized, and we have modern sensors, you have modern software, you have modern communication technologies that will allow you to get a lot of data from the aquaculture production. Then the question becomes, how do we turn the data to actionable information? Here comes the data-driven approach. Obviously, with a surge of machine learning, artificial intelligence, you can do a lot of machine learning approaches to this data you collect. But then in the same time, it is about how to make an optimal decision. Once you have this data, once you have this information that we are connected from the real-time operation of this aquaculture systems. So we propose our solution, which is a so-called digital twin. So digital twin, if you look at the literature, can mean many, many different things to many, many different people. But in our context, we are trying to propose an approach where we are not just looking at the data coming from the process, but we're also trying to encode the mechanisms of fish growth, of the water chemistry into a mechanistic model. And we combine such a mechanistic model together with online data, whatever data we can get from the production process, we put them together into a computational engine, and that is what we call a digital twin. So with this digital twin, we are making a linkage, if you like, between our models, computer models, computational models, with the underlying aquaculture facilities supported by the sensor technology, supported by the data transmission technology, and we help to make decisions. And by making decisions, I mean, we're trying to do primarily two different things. One is, are we able to estimate some of the critical parameters that are not always or not easily measured in the real-time production? Say, for example, nitrate and nitrite concentrations in aquaculture system, total nitrogen, which we know that there aren't many reliable sensors on the market that requires minimum human effort. And then how do we optimally decide the feeding and the water quality control decisions? So those are the two things that we're trying to address in our research and in our project. So without going into too much details, I'm going to show a few examples. Don't worry too much about the flow diagram. I just want to point out a few things through the three different examples. The first one, the center of the first example is where we have a mechanistic model that helps us to link together the water chemistry and how this total nitrogen is being affected by how much feed you put into your system, how much is being consumed by the fish, how much is left over by the fish, and how much is excreted by your fish. Right? So once we have this mechanistic model is able to give us a prediction of the total nitrogen concentration in the system. And to start with, the prediction is not going to be very accurate, but what we can do is we can link that model, mathematical model, together with offline measurement, very infrequent measurement, once a day, once a few days, once a week, help us to calibrate this model to correct the prediction. And therefore our prediction of this critical parameter becomes more and more reliable when we move along the time. So that's the first example, as I said before, trying to estimate the critical parameters and variables to help us monitor the production process better. And the second example is where we get a lot of data from the, the BBSRC project mentioned before. Those are data from the actual production system in a fish farm in China. Because by the way, that project was a collaborative UK-China 2 million project trying to bring people together from the two countries to look at aquaculture. And once we get this data, which tells us how the decision is being made in actual RAS system to cultivate a certain fish species, we're trying to turn this data into the information that allows us to predict when we go from day 0 into 1 month ahead of the time, how this fish is going to grow from a baseline weight into a certain weight, and we can see a fairly reliable prediction between the model and the actual measurement being conducted in the actual facility. So this illustrates that when we have sufficient amount of data, that does allow us to build a computer model to help us make predictions. And then finally, if we don't have such a type of data, then again, we go back to the so-called digital twin approach, where we link this mechanistic model together with online, so not online, some infrequent measurements, so that we can make decisions in terms of when and at what amount we should feed to the fish. So therefore, we can reduce the time of the fish cultivation to meet the market required biomass weight as soon as possible. So this, I hope, have given you a sort of flavor of what we do to link the mathematical model to help us make decisions. In terms of a target market, we can easily think of aquaculture producers. If we have the software available and fully validated and tested, then we should be able to deploy the software tools to help the aquaculture producers to make continuous monitoring of the process parameters I mentioned before, and to make optimized decision making in terms of feeding, in terms of water quality control, and so on and so forth. And then we also believe that rather than us in academia to push this to the market, we can collaborate with a technology service provider. And in the project we mentioned before, we actually work with a control software provider to help us implement some of this academic research and findings into their software. And they're trying to embed the algorithms together with the hardware solutions to support intelligent aquaculture operations. And then I guess in terms of results and impact, if we do that, if you have this digital twin, obviously, as we mentioned before, we can potentially improve the productivity by increasing the amount of fish you produce within a certain amount of time, within the constraint of your resources. We can improve the process monitoring, and we can make more proactive troubleshooting. We can look a few days, a few weeks ahead of time, what potentially can go wrong, and make mitigation strategies well in advance. And finally, the capability to predict, how much fish you are going to produce and at what time. You can link that information potentially with your supply chain, your downstream, upstream operations. This will help you to decide, how much of fish feed you are going to source from where, and then how much of the fish you are going to produce to push to the market. And this, we believe this integration with the supply chain will help the business as well. But having said that, I have to admit that the current TRL is fairly low. We are still at the applied research level. A lot of those results, because of COVID, were based on simulations. We have a bit of retrospective data to validate certain elements of our research, but still at the methodological development stage. And we believe further development, we would like to push this into a more applied research, lab scale test, and even to the full scale test to push it to a higher TRL level. And hopefully we will be able to collaborate with more commercial partners in the UK, in Europe, to help to make this, more into a more mature stage. And yeah, that's me. And this is my contact email. And hopefully my presentation, will open up the door for more collaborations in the future. And thanks so much. And I hope I'm doing okay with my time. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Taro. We're running a little bit out of time, and so what we're going to do is to deal with any questions that come in at the very end of the session, all the questions together. So just to remember that everyone can ask their questions in the Q&A, please, and if you can address the presenter so that we know who we can ask the question to. So thanks a lot again, Taro, and we can go to the next speaker now. So our next speaker is Victor Lobenov. He's a PhD student at the University of Gothenburg, where he works on nutrient remineralization in aquaponic systems. In specific, he focuses on microbially mediated pathways for waste decomposition and resource recovery as a strategy to promote circularization in controlled environment agriculture and aquaculture systems. So today he's going to present also an AquaXcel TNA project, the outcomes of it. It's called Aqua Waste Improving Plant Health Through Nutrient Remineralization in Aquaponic Systems. So Victor, go ahead, you can share your slides when you're ready.
All right. So I think there's always that button is always kind of hidden.
It's not yet presenter mode.
There we go. It's looking good now.
Perfect.
Okay, thank you, Marika, for that introduction. So today we'll be discussing here nutrient remineralization and how we've applied it in the aquaponics context, but it can actually be more generally applied across aquaculture. As we know, aquaculture has a lot of promising growth ahead of it and has already exhibited quite a tremendous amount of growth, especially compared to capture fisheries. However, with that increased growth comes increased waste production. Specifically, aquaculture waste is very rich in a lot of bioavailable carbon and nitrogen, leading to eutrophication. At one point, looked at the amount. If you look at the total amount of aquaculture production in Norway, for example, it's enough energy to power 150,000 homes per year. So we're talking about a very large transfer of energy into our coastal systems. Of course, fish solids are made even more difficult by the fact that they are in that water environment. They're quite dilute, and for that reason, it's not as easy to just put a big net around it and contain it. Probably most significantly, they're not that the incentives are not really there for aquaculture farmers to take the initiative on their own to remove that waste. So as a solution to that, many people have, well, there's a lot of regulation in terms of putting the solids, especially in land-based systems, in some confined area. So largely, generally speaking, that's a settling basin. However, a lot of the infrastructure can get quite expensive. So pumping out those settling basins so that they can be taken to a municipal wastewater treatment system adds a lot of cost. Usually aquaculture facilities, if they're land-based, are in very rural areas, so they're not close to a lot of good infrastructure. So our goal was to take a gander at this and try to focus on an inexpensive but efficient solution. Of course, everybody is always looking for that ideal. So we developed this system where we have a settling basin that can be integrated into any existing facility. And then we have a two-step process, basically first anaerobic digestion, and then we pass it into a sequential batch reactor. So the general idea here is that we create two distinct microbial environments, and they, in the first one, it targets the breaking down that waste, and then the second one, releasing the mineral nutrients. So I won't go too much into detail here, but basically the underlying magic splits these larger fecal particles into, breaks them down into smaller ones, which is entirely done through microbial mechanisms. This releases a lot of methane and carbon dioxide. And so we hope that that can be one example of valorization from the waste. However, for aquaponics, it's quite convenient to use the system because a lot of the mineral nutrients are colloidally bound, so they are only present in the solid waste. And so in this way, we can basically create two outputs, the biogas component and then the mineral nutrient component. Regarding the target market, I am of the opinion that aquaculture in general needs to focus on solid waste capture and treatment because it's not a sustainable model for us to keep on eutrophying our coastal waterways. But in the short term, we're mainly focusing on recirculating aquaculture systems because they are already concentrating their solid waste. And there are some offshore closed containment aquaculture facilities. Aquaponic facilities, as I pointed out, have a unique way to benefit from the system. However, if we think more long-term, any type of animal husbandry facility could use a similar technology. So in that way, we're trying to focus on what are the inherent mechanisms underway with the solids degradation and conversion to mineral nutrients. And for example, what are specific nutrient requirements that these microbial communities need so that we can create economically profitable waste revalorization. So there's a lot of unexplored potential there. Currently, we came out with a publication showing that the remineralized nutrients were more bioavailable in a hydroponic system compared to hydroponic nutrient solutions. And this is quite logical because hydroponic nutrient solutions are salt-derived fertilizers, and it's not usually plants require a lot of microbial infrastructure so that they can integrate those nutrients into their roots. And we've published on that as well, that plants play a very decisive role in choosing their microbial community. And once they've established that, then they can very readily take up nutrients from the water. However, it's best done when those nutrients are delivered already in a microbially mediated way, such as our system provides. We are looking right now into, we're doing a bunch of experiments to see, to quantify, for example, the biogas output, to determine what is the ideal amount of solids going into the system to maximize efficiency. So as always, there are a lot of research questions left to do. However, we've started the process filing for a patent for the system because there are several companies that are interested in implementing it in their facilities. So we are at the TRL 4 level. It's been validated in lab in a greenhouse. However, there's a big difference between doing these kind of 1 liter bottle experiments or in a controlled greenhouse environment and implementing it in a facility that produces 50 to 100,000 tons of trout or salmon per year. So there's the next step basically is to find a more market-ready, implementable product. And yeah, as I'm coming from the research background, this is a new territory for me, so a lot to learn. With that, I think I overcompensated and went a bit too short, but I'd be more than happy to take any of your questions, or you can send me an email. I am quite excited about the direction that this research is going in, and I want to thank AquaXcel for allowing me the opportunity to do this research and to talk about it right now. And I look forward to future discussions and panels like this. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Victor. It's very interesting. Very good to see you have so much industry interest already at this stage of the development. So I don't see any questions at this moment, but people can digest the presentations as we go. And if there's any questions, they will pop up in the Q&A, and then we can deal with them at the very end. And as you said, people can also contact you and any other speakers with questions afterwards. Yep. So I hand back over to Alexandra now.
Thank you, Marike. So we're going back from the AquaXcel project, which is a transnational access project. So it opens the infrastructures across many countries in Europe for experimental research from researchers and industry from other countries. So if you would be interested to join and to also access freely one of those very highly specialized experimental facilities, then you can always have a look at the AquaXcel project. So, but now we go to another project, which has been launched under the All Atlantic collaboration, which is Aqua Vitae, and the speaker of today, was planned to be Fletcher Thompson who is a postdoc at the National Institute for Aquaculture Resources at the Technical University of Denmark, better known as DTU Aqua. He is a marine specialist in robotics engineering, sensor data acquisition, processing, and perception. Unfortunately, he has become ill, so he could not be here with us today, but we're very happy to have another speaker from DTU Aqua, who is Patricio Mariani, and he is a senior researcher at the research organization, having a PhD from the University of Naples. He's currently the head of the group on observation technology. He focuses on the development of ocean technology, supporting next generation of integrated marine ecosystem assessment. He's also president of a large network called Euromarine. He's coordinator of a project called Mission Atlantic, and also has been a principal investigator in several projects. So I'll give the floor to Patricio, and he will show the presentation of Aqua Vitae.
Thank you, Alexandra. I hope you can see my screen fine. And as Alexandra mentioned, this research was conducted mainly under the project Aqua Vitae, which is one of the 5, indeed, all-Atlantic research projects, 2 of them dealing with aquaculture and 3 dealing with integrated ecosystem assessment. And as mentioned briefly by Alexandra, I'm the coordinator of one of those, which is called Mission Atlantic as well. The project I'm describing here today, it's indeed the work of my postdoc, Fletcher Thompson, who, as mentioned by Alexandra, couldn't make it today at the very last moment. And it is about the 3D image reconstructions in aquatic environment. So the industrial need for these 3D images is indeed widespread. So there is a need for underwater inspections, for example, of offshore industry and infrastructures. There is a need also for coastal management, because we can have much higher quality images for mapping, for example, coastal areas. But also for environmental monitoring, to revisit specific sites and understand changes in the bottom topography, for example. And of course, there is a big interest also in aquaculture, to be able to determine maybe 3-dimensional properties of the fish in order to better tune feed productions, or also type of infrastructure to be used and the processing of the fish. And of course, different technologies have been used to achieve these 3D image reconstructions. They are not only optical sensings that, of course, are very much limited by underwater visibility, which is generally quite poor, especially if you apply those in places like Denmark, as we do. Other option is the use of acoustic devices, which is a very good opportunity to expand your field of view. But of course, it's a bit more difficult to use, and generally they are dedicated for expert users. In any case, the existing solutions for these 3D images are generally quite expensive and rather specific to specific applications indeed. So we have been experimenting different solutions in the project Aqua Vitae, and we started with stereoscopic systems, which have the drawback of being a bit difficult to handle, because there are different type of tuning that needs to be done. They are also prone to distortions of the images, and also very sensitive to the method of deployment, and not very good with vibrations and changing of the environmental conditions. We have been exploring then other options, also to overcome the limit of turbidity and backscatter in the water. We have used a camera system which was developed in another project called Utopia, and the camera system itself is called Utopia. It stands for Underwater Time of Flight Imaging Acquisition System. And the method it works is basically it's a pulse laser that emit a pulse light indeed, and then it's kind of a scanning the environment at different depth or different ranges. And then the camera is tuned with the timing of the laser in order to get the images. The advantage of that is that you filter out all the backscatter, and you have an additional element that you know the distance of the object, and so you can reconstruct the dimensions in 3D. During the course of the project, we have been using this system, but then because of COVID and because of all the technology bottlenecks related to COVID and the manufacturing of some of these components, actually became difficult to access the camera again. So we have been exploring other options, kind of a stereoscopic system under steroids in a sense, because this camera system is a multi-camera system, indeed using 8 cameras, 6 of them done for 3D underwater reconstructions. This is a system developed by Blue Atlas, which is a Danish company. And we have been working with them to understand possibilities of the use in aquaculture systems. In these examples that I show in the background, maybe it's not very visible, but it's scanning basically an underwater pier or a wall in a harbor. And you can see on the right, actually, that is also very good in reconstructing in 3D mussels formation. I forgot to put a zoom on that, but trust me, there is actually quite a high resolution of those images. So we managed to work with Utopia and exploring options with Blue Atlas, and we have been pushing also another type of solutions, which is kind of stereoscopic system, but much more compact and portable, and mainly used for gaming in those days. It's called the Oak-D Lite. And what we have been doing, we have kind of built around this camera system an enclosure that could be easily integrated in underwater robotic systems, like, for example, the one I show here, which is an ROV, remote operated vehicles, provided by the Blue Robotics in the US. And so we have basically designed an integrations or a system to integrate this stereoscopic camera for underwater applications on the ROV. It has, of course, several advantages. It's an all-in solution. It's very cost-effective. Was mentioned before that having cost-effective solution in for ocean applications or underwater applications is not always simple. In this case, we have actually optimized the casing and the integration methods to actually have a very cost-effective solution. The field of view is also quite good, with 70 degrees, more than 70 degrees on the horizontal plane and about 57 in the vertical plane. We have quite a lot dense, what is called depth points for 3D reconstructions. 300,000 of them up to 10 meters, and allows for fast processing also on board of the companion computer on the Blue Rock 2, but also kind of allows for local storage and then further analysis and processing of the images later on. I mentioned a few times that this is a cost-effective, and that was actually very key for us in order to increase the number of users that can use this these camera systems. And the rough calculation we have here, it's about 500 euro. So the target matter is, of course, widespread, because that's the main advantage of having a stereoscopic system into a ROV. We think that the offshore industry for inspections could benefit for that, but also fishery applications, even maybe in the trawls, to directly measure the size of the fish that are getting captured in the fishing. Aquaculture, for all the reasons I mentioned before, to measure fish, and also maybe mussels lines, as we wish to do in Aqua Vitae in the project, but also other type of use, including leisures and tourism. So in terms of results, this is actually a version 1 done with integration of another camera in the system, and we went there to inspect some of these mussels lines. Of course, the visibility conditions are not ideal, and there are waves and currents moving that, but still we were able to kind of reconstruct in 3D the mussels lines and make a model of it that allows for volume estimations of this. It's not only possible for mussels, but it's possible for other type of creatures. Here is a jellyfish example. So the technology seems to be able in this first version to actually do what we aimed for. So which is basically to have these biovolume measurements in mussel farm. As I mentioned, this one is the first version. We are currently testing version 2 based on the OptiLight camera in the pool. We had plans actually to go at sea this month, but we have not been able to do so yet. But we are very close to apply it in a realistic environment. The camera seems to be able to eliminate most of the distortion that we had and actually allows for this fast processing. It is already fully integrated on the BlueROV, so it seems all the transmission of the information and the local storage is working. The next phase is really to tailor the software and the integration part for the needs of the aquaculture community. And we aim to do so in combination with some specific stakeholder in Denmark, where we will go out there and test our camera for a few experiments. The camera itself, actually, and the system itself is very portable. So we have done the integration on the ROV, but actually it can also be used as a standalone solution. It basically requires a Raspberry Pi to work with, and we aim to have this integration on a Raspberry Pi and maybe some Internet of Things type of communication to see if we can actually have them deployed and have efficient data transmission on land. So if you want further details on the technical part and the type of technology development we are doing, please contact Fletcher. He will soon recover, I'm sure, and he will be back in business probably in a couple of weeks. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much, Patricio. This was very clear and very promising as well. I mean, it's do I understand it correctly that it has been tested for well, shellfish, but not yet on fish, or is that something that is
correct,
expected to do?
Yeah, it will. I mean, it will be some extra challenge to do that. We are planning to see how much we can capture with the fact that fish are moving and moving quite fast, and how many points we will be able to collect in order to do the 3D reconstructions. At the moment, the main target is the mussel lines and oysters and shellfish type of production that are less mobile.
So then you can really estimate the biomasses on those, but because I know for fish industry it's also a huge challenge. So in order to measure the biomass, so if that could be proven to be a useful solution, that would be surely very welcomed.
The other one I briefly mentioned, which is the Utopia camera, seems, I mean, that one is good to go in a sense for that type of applications in fish measuring.
Okay, very interesting. Okay, well, thank you. Then we will go continue our talks and go to the last speaker of today, and representing the GAIN project, which is also an EU-funded project, which we will now hear more about, and which is very relevant for today's environmental impact theme on the Horizon Forum. So we're happy that Richard Newton could be with us today here from the Institute of Aquaculture at the University of Stirling, where he is a research fellow. He has been working extensively on driving circular economy principles in aquaculture food systems, which were the core focus of the GAIN project, as we will hear about more now. But he has also been working with other projects already over 20 years, and not only in Europe, but also in Asia and Africa, and where he has been conducting sustainability assessments to better understand and promote more efficient and also sustainable production. So if you can share your screen, Richard, and then we will move to your presentation shortly.
Great, thanks, Alexandra. Morning, everybody.
Morning. You have a nice Scottish background, I see.
Yeah, I'm working for my allotment.
Well, it's always good to see parts of the area where people are coming from. So, okay, now we see a presentation.
That's not mine.
Ah, okay.
That's mine. Can you see that?
Yes, yes, yes. But not yet. If you can move to the, yes, now it's perfect. Thank you.
So I should start off by talking a little bit about GAIN. So GAIN finished in October last year, and the objectives of GAIN were to promote what we call eco-intensification, not just at the farm level, but throughout the value chain. So getting more from less, principally looking at kind of circular economy type principles. So we were very much looking at things like byproducts from the processing end. We also looking at precision aquaculture at the farming stage and better welfare to improve the efficiency of production throughout the value chain. So today, really, I want to talk about how we measured sustainability within the project, and principally using what we called the Eco-Intensification Sustainability Index. So when we were measuring the sustainability throughout the value chain, we wanted to have a comprehensive measure of the sustainability. We didn't just want to measure environmental sustainability, we also wanted to incorporate the economic and the social impacts as well within the assessment. And also, we were also aware of increasing attention being paid to welfare and the One Health kind of principles which were being applied to aquaculture. So incorporating welfare indicators into the assessment as well. And this, of course, poses us challenges in how we do this throughout the value chain, not just looking at what's happening at the farm level, but also through feed production and through to processing and beyond. And we also wanted to make sure that what we were doing was relevant at a regional level and had contextualization at a local and international level, and something that stakeholders and consumers could engage with. So we were also aware that with PEF going on, as we've heard from before, but also lots of initiatives from a lot of the certification agencies, we wanted to make sure that we were encompassing all of these different perceptions throughout what we were doing. So we wanted to make sure that all of the value chain actors were involved and that we could encourage traceability throughout the value chain. So our approach was very much similar to what's happening within the PEF. We wanted to use life cycle assessment as a framework for what we were doing, but we also wanted to incorporate aspects of value chain analysis. So the difference between those is that life cycle assessment measures accumulated environmental impacts throughout a supply chain, whereas value chain analysis explores relationships within a value chain, where the power and kind of power dynamics lay, where policy and governments affect decision making, how goods and services move throughout the value chain, where value is created within the value chain, and these kinds of aspects. So value chain analysis very much underpins a lot of the principles around socio-economic sustainability, whereas life cycle assessment is more about environmental sustainability. But they're connected, that's quite difficult to integrate together. So we started off with a process of engagement with different stakeholders and experts to develop the indicators that we wanted to incorporate within the index. starting off with a series of life cycle assessment type indicators that you see within the PEF, but then incorporating also more environmental indicators which are more pertinent to aquaculture, things like fish in, fish out ratios, which measure the efficient use of marine ingredients, for example. Also things like the chemical use at the sites, the benthic impacts and things like these, but then also incorporating into it economic indicators, social indicators and welfare indicators. And we came up with quite an expansive list of these different indicators, but we were aware throughout that we were going to be collecting data from the industry. So we had certain caveats in terms of what indicators we could include. So first of all, we had to make sure that the indicators could be incorporated in terms of a value chain, or as far as possible within the value chain, so using the same kind of principles that we would use for life cycle assessment. But also we were aware that we were relying on what data was available from the industry, and we didn't want to ask them to collect more data for us. We wanted to rely on data they already collected. So in the end, we had quite a large list of environmental indicators. Like this is kind of life cycle assessment type indicators for production of feed in Norway. And as you can see, these are kind of similar type life cycle assessment categories that we see global warming potential, but we started to separate things out a little bit more. We wanted to look at the difference between non-renewable energy and renewable energy. We wanted to separate the water out, which between blue and green water, blue being water which is abstracted and green water which is precipitation. We wanted to measure the use of marine ingredients, so we were able to incorporate fish in, fish out ratio as a life cycle assessment category, and biotic resource use as well, to measure the trade-offs between the marine ingredients use and the other type of environmental impacts categories. Also, we were able to incorporate some of these indicators from a kind of socioeconomic perspective as well. So some of these come from the processing. We looked at the different proportions of different co-products coming out of processing in terms of mass and value. We separated out the global warming potential for the processing of the raw materials, how much renewable energy was used at the processor compared to in the value chain, and non-renewable energy use. We looked at the employment ratios throughout the value chain. You can see it was quite an interesting result for us that actually there were more female people in the value chain overall per ton of product produced, most of it within the processing sector, whereas male employment is dominated within the grow out part. We also can see here we were able to measure mortality at different points within the value chain, at the grow out stage and within the hatchery, and then eutrophication, how much of that came from the feed and how much was at the farm level. This is a kind of example of the type of results that we were able to get. Then the challenge was to take all of these indicators and then to try and compile them into an index. So we used a stakeholder survey to try and gauge the perception of different environmental and other sustainability impacts. And then we used their perceptions to weight those impacts and the results that we got through the assessment, and then compile those into the index. So this gives you an idea, flavour of how different stakeholders rated different sustainability challenges within the industry in Norway. So carbon footprint and byproduct utilisation, benthic impact being the main ones, and fish in, fish out ratio, feed efficiency and energy consumption were the ones which came up strongest. Then when we took these results, we would then compile them into an index by assessing how much of the data that we got fell into these different categories, how much of it was poor, how much was borderline, how much was acceptable, and how much was excellent compared to this kind of framework based on data that we received, where the averages were lying, and also data from the literature, and then we applied the weightings to that to be able to compile that into an index. And in the end, it looked something like this. So we could see how much proportion of the industry was falling into the different categories within the different sustainability criteria. So typically we saw that a lot of farms are doing very well on welfare and social, but also there was a few bad apples, if you like, that didn't perform well on certain aspects. Same with environmental indicators, most fell somewhere in the middle with a few extremes either end. And the economic indicators, we saw that overall it was performing pretty well, which is what you would expect for a well-established growing industry such as Norwegian salmon industry. This just gives you a flavour of the type of sustainability index that we were applying, the assessment we were applying throughout the GAIN project. Unfortunately, due to COVID, half of the project was during COVID lockdown. We were only really able to do the work with the Norwegian salmon industry. We also intended to do this for Polish carp, and we also wanted to apply it to the Mediterranean species as well, but we were unable to travel to collect that data, and we only really had good data for Norway in the end. So in conclusion, we were able to construct these sustainability indices for a wide range of indicators, but we needed further industry validation. We ran out of time in the end. We validated the collection of the data, and we validated how different stakeholders perceived different sustainability challenges, but we were not able to validate in the end how the actual index was put together, because that came right at the end of the project. We would like to put it out to the industry and seen what their thoughts were on how the index looked in the end and whether they felt we were in the right ballpark. We would also like to have the spread of indicators as well. And in the end, it was still dominated by the environmental indicators, and that was because the data's there and it's easy to model and apply. And socioeconomic indicators much more difficult. The economic data is particularly difficult because it's so proprietary, and not many companies are willing to part with that. We'd like to apply it to more diverse production systems as well. Salmon's quite a uniform production system where everything's produced in pretty much the same way, but we don't see that when you look at things like the carp production and other production systems, especially outside of Europe. And we want to ensure that it's applicable and consistent, and its consistency to industry, to make sure that all of the indicators that we're using within one industry can be applied to other industries as well. So we have some kind of uniformity across the board. Going forward, we would probably like to try and develop this further and incorporate it into a tool system similar as we saw in the first presentation, but that's for future projects. So thank you for listening to me for that. Sorry if I'm a little bit choked up. I'm actually just getting over COVID, so thanks for bearing with me.
Okay, yeah, thank you. I mean, yeah, these diseases can sit quite a long time, as we know all, or most of us. So yeah, we're happy that you could make it. So thank you for this very interesting presentation as well. Maybe you can stop sharing and then we can see all panelists at the same time. So there was I will have a few questions for all of you, and then you just unmute yourself. And I think I could go to Richard and maybe Saya at the same time, because I mean you have been looking into these types of ways of how to make a tools to better have a regulation and to really link it also to the good environmental practice. But what was your experience on the availability of data? I know that some of you have already thought something about it, that you use data that already were available. But what about the quality of data? Could you say something on how you can detect or be sure that it is of a good quality and that they are standardized so that you can compare one set of data with the others. So maybe Richard, you could start and then I can ask. So yeah, also this.
Yeah, it's a bit of a mixed picture, and it depends a little bit on your existing relationships. I think for the life cycle assessment, the environmental data, a lot of that comes down to feed, and getting good feed data is critical for having kind of good life cycle assessment, I think. And we have quite good relationships already with a lot of the feed companies, so we were able to get pretty good feed data, which I think helped us a lot. In terms of some of the other data, the farm data was more tricky. We very much relied on building relationships with our local partners. We had good partners throughout the projects. In Norway, GIFAS was our principal partner up in Nordland. So we were able to use their network to help us gain access to the industry. We were conscious through earlier work that we needed to be quite succinct in terms of how we collected data, and they needed to know what it was going to be used for and how it was going to be useful for them as well. And yeah, it was tricky at times. We got some good data from a lot of people. We really had to push for it to be able to get it, and it didn't make things easier during COVID to be able to do that. I think because we were there in June 2020 and to start with, and we collected the first data, but then COVID kicked off. Long after that. So that made things true. I think if we'd spent more time there, which we intended, then that makes things a lot easier. From our other people working on similar projects, being there and having that face-to-face interaction makes it easy to get data. I think it's, if people understand what it's being used for, it's not a big issue, but you do have to build that trust relationship to get it.
Okay, and I know, I mean, one thing is the acceptance or the value for the industry, but could it also be looked at as a possible new, as you would say, a traffic light system that goes beyond, for example, salmon life as it is at the moment, but that this type of tool could be used as a regulator?
Potentially, when we started off, really we wanted to use it internally for validation within the project, but I think looking at the way things have moved on since then, I think there is room for more and more of these type of tools, especially if you can say that it's related to the PEF, it's PEF compliant and everything like that. But I think also incorporating some of the more kind of aquaculture specific indicators would be useful for various people within industry, because then they can also use that to help them with certification as well. Yeah, potentially that's something we're thinking about at the moment for next projects, to see whether we can develop this into kind of a decision support tool as well, but we're a little way for that.
Well, it's certainly promising, and I think the need for better tools is certainly there. I would like to go back to Tarja on this topic also, because you also have been very much depending on data and on the quality of those to develop the AquaPEF. What are your, I mean, but from the Mediterranean point of view, so very much different than the salmon industry. What are your experiences when it comes to data and availability?
So we have realized that there are like two different types of companies. Inside the AquaPEF project, we have very small companies. So for them, it was really difficult to collect the data. So we have to be there almost. So looking at all the bills, etc. So what are the kind of the diesel that they need? So everything, we have to be with them to collect the data, because it's they are not used to collect this kind of data. But because since it is LCA, we need also data from upstream and downstream. So when we ask the data, their data regarding the feed that they are using, feed producers are very much used to working with this kind of data. Most of them, of the companies for the Mediterranean aquaculture feeds, they already have CO2 already accounted. So everything, they are working with the PEF of the feed. They are very much used to it. So we even could obtain directly the environmental impact kind of certified from the feed producer, not for the aquaculture producers. But this was with the SMEs of the project. Now that we are doing the replicability with the huge companies and like the biggest companies in the Mediterranean basalmine production, they are aware of this kind of data. It's more easy to collect. However, this is regarding to calculate the LCA, but then for using the tool, once they have to introduce data on a web tool, there are different concerns. It's not the availability, it's the confidentiality. How is this data captured? Where, who will be able to look to my data, or what is the purpose of having there my data? I think we are working a lot with the confidentiality and the data security of the server of the AquaPEF tool.
So you would say confidentiality maybe is a major, I would say, criterion for industry to use the newly developed tool.
Yes, the confidentiality could be one. Apart from for user friendly or they just companies really wanting to know their environmental footprint will use the tool, because it's not for, I don't know, maybe a company that the sustainability is not key aspects for the industry. They want to use it for sure, but then the confidentiality, because the tool collects the data downstream and upstream of the chain. So if you are a aquaculture producer, you have to send an invitation to your feed producer, and now everything is together. You cannot see the data from your producer, they cannot see your data, but at least it's together, so they are aware. So what happens if a hacker goes into the tool and see and access to my whole know-how on producing? This is one concern, for sure.
I understand. But maybe if regulations change as well, there might be a new driver to take also this tool in use. I mean, now it's still on a voluntary basis, so it's something that a company chooses to use or not. Well, thank you very much. I think we'll go further to Taro. I think you have had some very interesting technologies there presented, and some service companies already use this, provide some software, as I know, for running and monitoring aquaculture systems. And how would you interact with those software providers at the moment with your digital twin model? Is it something you see that you would develop as a standalone project or product, or would it be an integrated part in a more broader software tool that is already used by aquaculture companies? Do you have any opinion on that?
Thanks very much for the question. I think to us, some form of integration and the partnership will be the key, because as people working in academia, we developed some of those fundamental mechanistic models, and we know how those models work. But end of the day, to push that to the market for people to be able to use it, we need a sort of software infrastructure, if you like, a software framework for our model to be embedded into that system. But frankly speaking, we are not experts in developing user interface to design the software. We are the experts doing the actual modeling part. So if I can draw any experience from the project we just finished, we had a software company in the consortium, and they already got this cloud-based software offering framework already. And they have the interface, which allows us to link, the Python-based, computer code with their infrastructure. And then that kind of integration, I believe, in my personal opinion, is the way forward.
Yeah, surely, because that's what we always hear. User friendliness is key number one in order to end users to really use it. And you do believe that you have a system that can be, that there is not yet in the market, as I would say. I mean, compared with other already developed or decision-making systems, you think that the project you have is adding value to that?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And that's why we have always been very keen to see to explore additional collaborative projects, especially because the University of Surrey is based in the part of the UK. I'm sure Richard knows it really well. We are based in a part of the UK where aquaculture is really, really small compared with Scotland, compared with the Mediterranean. So in a way, we position ourselves as a technology provider, but then how to push that into practice, we need help.
Yeah. No, but surely, I mean, I think artificial intelligence and all these decision model issues, these are really, in the digitalization of aquaculture, it's really an important part of that. So thank you very much. I think we will surely make this also this knowledge more available through the project and through EATiP in different platforms as well. So we move further to the other AquaExcel speaker, which is a little bit on a different aspect, of course, on the development of biogas and minerals, which is really within the circular economy. You have mentioned the economically viability of the system. Do you think that because the use of sludge and the use of byproducts from aquaculture raw systems, for example, we have seen that the companies are not always so eager to do something about it because it costs more than the gain is delivering. So what are your thoughts about the economic viability of the system? Could you have a short reply on that, Victor?
Yes, sorry, there's a kettle going on in the background. In terms of economic viability, I think that there's currently a lot more potential for aquaponics, but when you look at the scale of biogas that we're able to produce, like it's unpublished data, but basically we're able to get about 80% of the incoming carbon converted into methane. And if you take that on a larger scale, like in general, like trout, salmon, they have a one-to-one conversion of the amount of feed you go in to the amount of fresh weight feces going out. And so it is a really sizable amount of carbon that can be converted into methane. And I think that if those systems are scaled correctly, then it could be very economically viable. But right now, yeah, it's on a legislation issue. There are basically like 5 laws in the European framework which really hurt aquaponics. There was a recent review paper on this, and basically, for example, here in I'm currently doing a partnership with the University of Ghent in Belgium, and there's an aquaculture or there's a hatchery for trout on the French border, and when those trout are produced in the hatchery, they're fed an organic feed and they're considered organic. But then the moment, of course, that trout are taken into a recirculating aquaculture system, they lose that organic certification. And if a drop of that water touches a plant, that plant also loses its organic certification. And I think that that really has hurt the market because people want to buy organic, and then you have to go into this whole explanation that actually this is kind of better than organics because we can't use the same kind of pesticides and stuff. So I think that there's those limitations on the aquaponics market as a whole, and then this waste revalorization, which would probably follow that quite a bit, is then slowed down. But I think that for aquaculture specifically, there's also potential if that biogas can be captured efficiently and then connected into the network.
Yeah, there certainly needs a lot to be done to adapt the regulations to the new development. That's for sure. But you're also looking at feed. No, it's minerals and biogas. It's not like feed or oils or these types of byproducts.
Possible. Yeah, it's possible. I think that there are two avenues for that. One, you can, for example, these sequential batch reactors can be used to cultivate certain bacteria, which themselves can be used as microbial protein sources. But then you run into the regulatory issues of creating feed out of waste. And then I think the other avenue that you can go in is taking the biogas and then using that to, like, you can change the composition of the gas depending on the cultivation requirements, and you can promote, for example, hydrogen, HOBs, hydrogen oxidizing bacteria, which themselves could be used as a microbial protein source. And that way you don't have the actual feces coming in contact with something that would then be used as a microbial protein source. So I think that there's a lot of avenues there, because once you break it down enough, then you can go in a bunch of directions in terms of what kind of microbial community you want to do.
Yeah, that's really really true. We did have a question here on the use of plant extracts, but well, I think in aquaculture there is already a huge use of plants as feed components in the feed. I don't know if any. Well, you see also the question from Ivan Idaho. So if any of you want to reply on that, but I think the use of chemicals, and that's maybe also something that the people working on the PEF and the Eco Sustainability Index can reply on, that the use of chemicals is something that is being included in the environmental tools, isn't it? Can maybe Richard or Saria talk about it?
I can just say that at least for the PEF studies, currently hormones I think are not included. So some chemicals and the potential impact on the environment of those chemicals on the ecotoxicity or other kind of impacts are included, but hormones and antibiotics currently are not in the PEF methodology. Just sometimes maybe the reporting of the use of this kind of antibiotics. However, just to say that we sometimes when we try to change one substance by another, there should be a specific impact assessment on that specific, for example, plant extract. It could be less. It could has less environmental impact maybe on the environment while it is on use, but sometimes the production of that material or extract or substance could has higher environmental impact than the normal chemicals. So you have to compare the production and the use of this extract against the production and use of other chemicals. So it's not just the using itself, but also the production, because sometimes plant extract could have a high environmental impact because of the agricultural and the transportation and everything. But if you are using a plant extract from bio-waste, from food waste, for example, so you are reducing that part. So it's not that easy, like, it's not easy answer. It's not, okay, it is good or it is bad. So it depends.
It's complex, as it always is. Yes, that's for sure. Okay, I'm afraid we are out of time now. So I think I thank the panelists very much for all your replies to the questions, for your excellent presentations, which we will put online. And I give the final word to David Bassett, General Secretary of EATiP, who will close the meeting.
Thank you. Excuse me. Thank you, Alexandra. And again, my own thanks to the speakers. and particularly for the 5 projects for following the methodology that you were provided on direct application of the project work you are undertaking. I hope to our audience you found that methodology and style helpful. And as I said at the beginning, if you can think of future projects for us to present that you're engaged in, please do let us know. EATiP as a European technology platform, our construct is to take a multi-stakeholder approach. And I think we've very much seen this morning that that multi-stakeholder quadruple helix approach of combining industry, policymakers, civil society, and research and academia is very necessary for the broad types of topics we've been considering. It can take some time for project research and the impact of that research to be fully realized in terms of application, in terms of changes arising from that application, and in terms from policy. As we've just heard in the questions there, it can take some, it can then throw up challenges in terms of the application of regulation or policy to the subtleties and the innovations that are rapidly emerging. But I think what's definitely true is that sustainability indices and performance product environmental footprint is not an issue that's going to go away. It's going to become much more prevalent as we consider sustainability measures for all sectors in society. And so the practical applications of what we've been considering and the emerging, evolving and developing understanding of that is highly relevant. And I think we can be very proud that the industry and our research community is proactively addressing the challenges that this throws up with the practical outputs and robust and justifiable and easily defendable methodologies that we're creating. So thank you again for your attention. As I say, questions will be answered online. The presentations and a recording of this will be made available, and as registered participants, you'll be notified of that. I'll finally flag 2 other events that are coming up. The EATiP AGM takes place on the 21st of June in Brussels. On the afternoon of the 21st of June, there will be a series of thematic talks. In the morning, there will be a brokerage event co-hosted by EATiP and DG Mare, looking at the concept of a smart specialization platform for aquaculture under the Blue Economy smart specialization theme. And this will include looking at the transfer and sharing and application of innovations on a regional basis. And I would urge you to look out for future announcements on that. DG Mare and ourselves will be publicising it, and I would encourage you to keep an eye. As I say, the regional transfer and application of innovation, both at a technical and theoretical level, is an item to consider. And finally, some advance warning, but on the 29th of September, as part of the European Aquaculture Society Aquaculture Europe event this year in Rimini in Italy, EATiP will be running a joint session with the European Commission and EAS, looking at aquaculture solutions from policy to innovation. And again, we would encourage you to keep an eye out for notifications on that, and we'd encourage your registration of interest in that. So thank you once again to everybody for speaking. Thank you for your attention this morning. I've learned a lot. I have pages of notes scribbled down from things I was learning for areas that aren't my particular expertise. We look forward to welcoming you to future events for EATiP, and we wish you a successful rest of the day. Thank you.